Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our event for this afternoon will commence shortly. As a reminder, we seek your cooperation to switch off your mobile phone or switch it to silent mode. And please occupy front seat except the front one. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to Midas Executive Dialogue. Our program will proceed shortly with the arrival of our speaker, Dr. Hugo Slim, accompanied by Chief Executive of Midas and Senior Directors of Midas. After welcoming remarks by the Senior Directors of Security Study Center, Dr. Slim will deliver his talk and then followed by question and answer session. A small detail during the question and answer session, please state your name and institution, and please also make your question brief. Subsequently, the presentation of mementos to the speakers will signify the end of our session today. And we expect our event will end approximately on 16:30 hours. And there will be a light refreshment provided after the session. Thank you. Announcing the arrival of Yang Berbahagia Laksdia Datuk Ganesh Navaratnam, Chief of Executive of Midas, Dr. Hugo Slim, our speaker today, accompanied by Senior Directors of Midas and the delegation. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Yang Berbahagia Laksdia Datuk Ganesh Navaratnam, Chief Executive of Midas, our honorable guest and speaker for today, Dr. Hugo Slim, Head of Policy and Humanitarian Diplomacy at the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC in Geneva, Madam Biliana Milosevic, Head of Regional Delegation of ICRC, Yang dihormati Encik Nur Hisham bin Rosli, Senior Director for Security Study Center of Midas, Yang dihormati Brigadier General Azmi bin Muhammad Yusof, Director for Defence Study Center of Midas, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Malaysia Institute of Defence and Security Midas Executive Dialogue. We are very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Hugo Slim from the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC to give a talk on the topic of humanitarian perspective on artificial intelligence and cyber warfare. Before we start, let me give a short brief about him to all of you. May I, Doctor? Okay, thank you. Dr. Hugo Slim is a prominent figure who has a vast experience in humanitarian field. He works and conducts many research with regards of humanitarian issues, ethics and protection of civilians. He worked for the Save the Children and United Nations in Morocco, Sudan, Ethiopia, as well as the occupied Palestine territories and Bangladesh. He has written many books and received his PhD in humanitarian ethics from Oxford University in 2002. Currently, he is the head of policy and humanitarian diplomacy at the ICRC. Ladies and gentlemen, with Dr. Hugo's involvement, experience, skill, and everything, we hope we can gain as much knowledge as we can today from him. Before we proceed our session today, I would like to call upon Encik Nur Hisham bin Rosli, Senior Director of Security Study Center of Midas, to give his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Kanamai, our MC today. It's really awkward, actually, having your boss here in front of you, and you are given this such a big honor in delivering the welcoming remarks. Anyhow, good afternoon. Admiral Dato' Ganesh, our Chief Executive of Midas, and of course our beloved guest, I would say. I have to say that after some engagement downstairs just now, Dr. Hugo Slim and Miss Biliana, the regional head of the regional delegation in ICRC. Well, let's loosen up a little bit. Let's take this opportunity. We got an extremely, I would say, significant speaker, at least to us, who's around the region for his commitment, but willing on the sideline, providing us this opportunity, sharing such an interesting subject. It's arguably the subject of the day now, and looking at humanitarian law itself, from the conventional aspect till today, there's still a lot of gray areas, and there's always room for debates, and it's already complex on its own. But now, associating that with this new progress of technology or humanitarian advancement, for that matter, has in a way imposed on all aspects of the social fabric, the government, businesses, has somehow brought us to the need of addressing these challenges that comes with it. There's so much being said about 5Gs, and there's so much of the positive of it, so much of the negative of it. So now, all those things are brought up into a more conventional matter, which is warfare itself. And I must say that there are various forums that have taken place, in fact, locally and abroad, addressing the issue. So I think let's take this opportunity again, of increasing our knowledge, at least. For you, Dr. Hugo, the participants, mostly military, but you're very comfortable with them anyway. But there are some civilians from various organizations, think tanks locally, and let's take this opportunity for us to increase the knowledge. And we may not get all the answers today, but what is certain that when we walk out the room, there will be good takeaways that that would at least give us 2 or 3 notch up in whatever we do in life. So without further ado, may I call our speaker, Dr. Hugo. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hisham and Colonel, thank you very much for such a warm welcome today. It's a really great pleasure to be here. As we said downstairs, the ICRC is always very comfortable with military people, so it's always nice for us to be in a room of uniformed officers and civilians as well. So thank you for putting on such a great joint audience for us. And of course, on the battlefield, you have all your flags and all your insignia, and we have our flag too, our Red Cross, the emblem of what we are trying to achieve beside you, and sometimes for you. If you are wounded, if you become a prisoner, the ICRC is there for you as well. So thank you for inviting us. It's a great honor to be at Midas to address you today. And I'm personally so glad to be in Kuala Lumpur, because it's my first time here. And I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to share a discussion with Malaysian armed forces and military policy experts. Both my father and my grandfather, they both fought in Malaya, at various times in the last century. And so I've always heard them speak with great affection of Malaysia and Malaysian people. And my father always used to say that if ever in his life someone said to him, "You have to choose. You can only ever eat one kind of food in your life. What will it be?" And he always used to say, "Malaysian." He was in no doubt, because he said in Malaysian food you get the best of every single food from Asia. So I'm so pleased Bilania's taking us out tonight to eat Malaysian food, so I'm very excited. You have, of course, today set me a very difficult task, because you've asked me to talk about the new technologies that are being taken up in warfare today. And of course it's a difficult task because it's not yet fully clear what we humans will do with artificial intelligence in war, and how exactly force will be deployed in cyberspace. This year we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, which were signed after World War II in 1949, agreed and signed by states, and are universally signed and recognized by all states today. And of course, one thing is certain about the next 70 years of the life of the Geneva Conventions is that new technology, cyber, AI weapons, will play a huge part in warfare in the next 70 years. So as Hisham said, it is the issue of today, but it is really for certain the issue of tomorrow. And we stand at the dawn of this technological development today. And we can expect giant leaps in years to come, which may well change the nature of war, and it may well change the nature of what it means to be a human being, because we will become increasingly digitalized ourselves. So my task today is to give a humanitarian perspective on this latest revolution in military affairs, and I'll try and do 4 things to help us think about it. First, I'm going to reflect generally on our relationship with technology as human beings. Secondly, I'm going to define the humanitarian challenges in AI, cyber, and their ambiguity as weapons. I'll come back to that's the big thing, the ambiguity of these things as weapons or autonomous machines. Thirdly, I'll suggest that law and human control are the best guides to the responsible use of AI and cyber. And then finally, because I want us to go to our homes this evening a little happy, I want to express some optimism around AI and cyber, and to qualify the gloom and pessimism in many current predictions about AI and cyber warfare. So in doing all this, I hope to set out some clear humanitarian principles to guide Malaysia's armed forces and military policymakers as you think how best to apply AI and computer technology in new forms of attack and defense. And I hope this paper will help you a little also as you reflect on this area in your upcoming white paper and the process you have now in thinking about that white paper. But more than this, inside Malaysia, I hope that you will use these principles to influence others as you leverage Malaysia's distinctive influence in your military diplomacy around the region and your humanitarian diplomacy as an important state around the region and around the world. I think what people hear Malaysia talking about AI and cyber will be important to the way they think about it. And I think other people will be watching for your white paper in the region and around the world. So first, I want to talk about humans and technology. As a species of animal, we humans are exceptional in our relationship with technology. Our imagination, our reasoning, our creativity sets us apart from other animals. We are always inventing things and making things. And much of our history is the story of how we have harnessed powers beyond us, animal, vegetable, and physical, to our own human purposes. Through most of our existence as Homo sapiens, as we are called, the wise humans, we've merged ourselves with those non-human powers to operate mostly in hybrid form. We are very seldom just human beings. We are always a hybrid with some other invention or power that we have harnessed. So, for example, we rode horses to go faster. We made spears and guns to kill at a distance. We vaccinated ourselves to fight off microscopic predators. We are always operating as a hybrid, part human, part our inventions in some way. And today we are deeply attached to computers, which enable us to reach across time and space and make complex calculations and connections at incredible speed. Our new hybrid cyber humanity is set to dictate our next era as a species, as we increasingly live in human-machine interactions in all parts of our lives. These human-machine interactions will become increasingly integrated as we move from handheld devices that we all hold today to much more sophisticated interfaces that respond instantly to our five senses, machines that respond to our voice, our sense, our smell, our hearing, whatever, and are increasingly implanted inside our bodies and embedded in our bodies. Human technology is obviously not a simple thing. It is neither purely good nor purely bad. Its moral value depends on how we use technology. So we can expect this ambivalence, the double value, a potential to be valued good and a potential to be valued badly, in our continuing relationship with AI, and we can expect this ambivalence to exist in the way we use AI and cyber in war. These new capabilities will have the power to make war better and worse. So that's about our relationship with technology generally as a human. Now I want to look at the humanitarian challenge of AI and cyber as weapons. So what is this new technology that we all call AI and cyber? Artificial intelligence is the use of computers to carry out tasks previously requiring human intelligence, cognition, or reasoning, and often now going beyond what is humanly possible. And this artificial intelligence, as it develops, often leads to machine learning, the fact that machines themselves then learn and change, in which AI systems use large amounts of data to develop their functioning and to learn from their experience. And we've seen this in the way machines can play chess and invent whole new moves and beat humans and get better and better. They learn. These AI systems are typically based on algorithms, a model of mathematical formulae originally developed by the 9th century Muslim scholar from Persia, Al-Khwarizmi, and they're named after him. Al-Khwarizmi becomes algorithm in Greek. So we have the Islamic Enlightenment to thank for this great digital leap forward in the 21st century. Cyber is a word drawn from 20th century science fiction. It was a new word coined by an American science fiction writer in the 20th century. And it now refers generally to the computerized or virtual space generated and maintained by computers. It is also important to define what we mean by a weapon at this point, because much of the ethical and legal dispute around AI and cyber turns on whether these systems are weapons in themselves or some form of non-human, autonomous combatant, complete with their own autonomy and decision-making. So let me use the most basic archetypal idea of a weapon. The sword is perhaps the archetypal weapon in the human imagination. It's an inanimate object made by human hands and only ever operable in human hands. A sword is hammered from molten metal into shape. It's sharpened into a blade that cuts, and then held in the hands and wielded as a deadly weapon by a warrior. A sword has no mind of its own and cannot make decisions. And when the warrior is resting after battle, the sword lies inanimate, still beside him on the grass. A sword only becomes a weapon when taken up in human hands. And indeed, the original definition of a weapon is an object that only comes to life when operated by a human. So traditionally, a weapon has no life of its own and operates only under human control. If a sword suddenly leapt into life and began fighting on its own, it would no longer be a weapon, it would be a non-human combatant. And here is the first humanitarian challenge from AI and deep learning machines, the challenge of autonomy. If an AI weapon system is launched onto a battlefield to loiter, just hovering, loitering, or patrolling, or deliberately seeking out the enemy, and is learning as it goes, then when does it stop being a weapon and become a non-human combatant with autonomy in its critical functions and making its own targeting and activation decisions? This is the first real challenge. Are these weapons going to become non-human combatants, or are they going to stay under human control as weapons? The second challenge is one of humanitarian judgment. How can we be sure that a process of machine learning will stay true to humanitarian principles in the Geneva Conventions of restraint, minimum force, distinguishing between civilians and combatants, precaution, taking precautions before you attack or defend to protect civilians and civilians' objects, and proportionality, using the appropriate level of force to meet the threat. So how can we be sure that machines, as they learn, will maintain this humanitarian judgment of restraint, distinction, precaution, proportionality, even if these have been programmed into the system somehow at the beginning? Can we rely on AI systems to become more humane or less humane as the system learns from the environment around it? Is machine learning predictable along a given pathway or not? Can we predict that a machine will learn only to become better at distinction, at precaution, at proportion? Or perhaps, we don't know, the machine will become very bad at that and make other choices as it learns. The third humanitarian problem around AI and cyber is speed. The stunning difference between human speed and machine speed, even if a human was still controlling an AI learning system on the battlefield, could they keep pace with the learning and decision-making of the machine? In a world in which a simple text, an SMS text message, sent from Kuala Lumpur to Jakarta arrives almost immediately that you send it, what chance is there that we humans will think as fast as our machines over really complex battlefield environments and control the machines once they are in mid-flow? So that question of speed is another real challenge to us as humans. Problems of autonomy, judgment and speed are significant in what we can expect to be complex AI targeting systems using big data or agile robotic weapons operating at the physical front line like drones of many kinds. These three challenges also affect more general cyber warfare, which seeks out enemy computer systems and inserts malware to pause them, to repurpose them to do something else, or to destroy the enemy computers. But cyber warfare also presents 3 additional humanitarian challenges. The fundamental computer dependence of so many essential services today, water, health, power supply, finance and banking, education and communications, makes the civilian population in any conflict deeply vulnerable to precisely targeted cyber attacks. Cyber capability therefore gives rise to what some people call a very broad attack surface. Today, this attack surface is wider than ever before. This large surface is extremely vulnerable to a single pinpoint attack which would switch off a whole society in seconds, or switch off a health system, or a power supply, or a banking system. This capability creates the grave humanitarian risk of maximum effect from minimal strike. So you can get a comprehensive effect across your whole attack surface from a very minimal remote strike. If cyber systems offer a broader attack surface, they also potentially offer another risk, which is a deeper and more personalized attack surface. By gathering highly individual data or profiling from big data to mount major surveillance and response operations at individual level. We know now how much personal detail machines can learn about us, each one of us, and hold in different places. This can be used in war too. So you don't only get a broader attack surface, you get a really deep attack surface where you understand individuals across that war area. Millions of individual people could be monitored simultaneously by large computer systems during armed conflict, in which AI could be used for machine-based decision-making about, for example, who should be detained, who should be conscripted into armed forces, who should be deported. These humanitarian risks are increased by another feature of cyber attacks so far today: anonymity and the problem of attribution. It's often really difficult to know who has made a cyber attack. And even if you do know, it can be unwise to show that knowledge of the attacker for fear of revealing your own virtual position in a conflict. So very often, even when a power does know who attacks them, it won't say, because that is an indication that they are already in their system somewhere and watching them. So it's a problem of anonymity, attribution, and transparency of enmity in armed conflict. The current ease of anonymity and disguise in cyber warfare diffuses responsibility and avoids formal systems of accountability, deterrence, and shaming, which usually support humanitarian norms and restraints in warfare. So there's the challenges of artificial intelligence and cyber as we are beginning to see them. Now I want to look in the third section at the humanitarian responsibility that forces like the Malaysian forces, the Malaysian government, have in using AI and cyber warfare. The ICRC's humanitarian policy on these various computerized challenges of autonomy, judgment, speed, attack surface, and attribution is clear, and our policy is grounded in 3 simple positions. The first is that the existing legal obligations of international humanitarian law apply already to AI, new weapons, and cyber warfare. The second is that law and ethics require a necessary policy of human control in the application of these new weapons. And thirdly, as the nature and extent of these new weapons and methods become increasingly apparent in the years ahead as people use them more, develop them more, there is very likely to be a need for new military policies and the development of new law specifically related to computerized warfare. We will need more detail in a form of law, perhaps a new protocol, a new convention or something. So first, to go to our first point, it's clear that the ICRC, when we believe that existing IHL, the Geneva Conventions and other forms of IHL, already applies to the use of all new weapons and cyber warfare. The law's current principles of humanity, distinction, precaution, proportionality are clearly applicable to the use of new weapons and methods of warfare. So as we stand today, we have enough law. The law is clear and should be applied to the use of new weapons. These principles of IHL and the rules that prohibit deliberate attacks against civilians and the objects indispensable to their survival clearly and sufficiently restrict the use of new weapons within humanitarian limits. If it is unlawful to harm civilians by deliberately bombing them and their hospitals and water supplies, then it is equally unlawful to deliberately harm civilians by destroying the computer systems that control their health systems and water supplies. New weapons and new means of warfare are not new in themselves. Every generation tends to come up with new weapons and new methods, and there's a consistent requirement in IHL, particularly Article 36 of AP1, the Additional Protocol 1, that all new weapons should be designed in such a way that they can be used in compliance with IHL. That, incidentally, is why the ICRC objects and wants to ban nuclear weapons, because we believe it is impossible to use a nuclear weapon in compliance with IHL. And therefore it should be a banned weapon. And the humanitarian consequences of a nuclear weapon are too great. So every new weapon should be tested against the ability to use it under IHL. Secondly, my second point that our policy is decided now on AI and cyber is that to ensure this respect for the existing requirements of IHL, the ICRC deems it essential that a clear policy of human control is firmly fixed within AI and cyber warfare systems. This system of human control is needed to mitigate the humanitarian risks of AI and cyber systems. And there are several dimensions of necessary human control that we have already identified. The first, real-time human supervision is necessary to ensure that a human can intervene in the system to guide it or to deactivate it on humanitarian grounds according to law. So we believe firmly that there must be the human control that can intervene and deactivate or redirect a weapon. Only then will it be able to comply with IHL. Secondly, human supervision is also required to ensure predictability and reliability in an AI or cyber system. Without this, the machine learning of the system could lead to respond in unpredictable and unreliable ways that produce unlawful results. For example, a machine may learn to simplify its decision-making by targeting all young males across a conflict area. That would be unpredictable and in violation of IHL. So a human must be able to control and oversee the predictability and reliability of a weapon. Thirdly, human control is also required to oversee the scope of a weapon system so that it does not roam too widely or set itself new tasks as it learns from itself and its environment. Human control must oversee the scope of a weapon system. Human control should also be required to check highly personalized machine-based decision-making on the legal rights of individuals in armed conflict. For example, are machine-based detention policies, which are already happening, lawful? So in short, the policy of human control is necessary to ensure that all new AI and cyber systems remain weapons and do not become non-human combatants. It's also necessary to ensure that these systems stay within the laws of IHL as they operate and learn across the real-time battlefield and behind the front lines. And finally, we think it's very likely that in the next few years, they will reveal the need for a major new piece of policy making and probably the development of new law around AI and cyber warfare. Many states and groups of states have been actively developing new norms and guidelines on AI and cyber warfare in recent years. ASEAN itself has been very active in this field. And work from this region stands alongside the work of Russia, the USA, the EU, and many other states at the UN General Assembly. And then more spontaneous moves like the Paris Call and Microsoft's call for a digital Geneva Convention. So there's a lot of activity in trying to develop new norms at the moment. And this buzz of activity in regulation suggests that the storming and forming of new norms on cyber and AI is pushing for a need for clearer rules and policies. The ICRC is also aware that there's something of an arms race in AI, cyber, and new tech weapons at the moment, which means that some states are reluctant to come together in a comprehensive multilateral process to agree new norms and rules. In a way, people want to win the arms race and have all the technology they need before they enter the negotiations. And it seems to us that just as the development of a new generation of paradigm-shifting weapons is hotting up, the difficult process of negotiating their regulation is experiencing something of a freeze. And it would be good to break that deadlock. Finally, I'm going to give us some reasons for optimism before I stop. My talk so far has inevitably been a little pessimistic, and it's focused on what could go wrong in the take-up and development of AI and cyber. So I want to end with some optimism because, as I said at the beginning, human technology is always ambivalent as a power for good and a power for bad. And there are many things that are already extremely good about computerized warfare. Computerized warfare has delivered extraordinary levels of precision so that military targeting is now much better and able to show greater respect for the principles of distinction, precaution, and proportionality. And I realize I speak to people from a region in Southeast Asia which experienced terrible levels of carpet bombing and strategic bombing in the Korean War, first of all, in the 50s, and then in the American War, Vietnam, Laos, after that in the 60s and the 70s. Terrible levels of carpet bombing. This precision from computerized weapon is genuine progress and in the conduct of hostilities. And it means that in many recent wars we've seen an avoidance by some, not all, parties to conflict of this kind of blanket bombing because they can do precision bombing. So that's very positive. But it also means greater precision through computerized warfare means it's an even greater failure when sophisticated armed forces fail to operate precisely and effectively engage in indiscriminate bombardment. It's also important not to idealize human control, but to remember that the myriad of war crimes and atrocities committed in wars throughout history have been a direct result of human control. Human control of the weapons and methods of war has proved terrible for hundreds of millions of people in history. So we should hope, and we should insist, therefore, that computer control actually has the power to make wars better by complementing flawed ethical and legal practices of human control. So, in our view, the art of future war will be in how we find a balance between ethics and computers. This means developing a new humane culture of warfare that is adapted to our latest hybrid form of cyber humanity. And if I look at our own field of humanitarian action, just to end, AI is already transforming the conduct of humanitarian operations. The use of big data has the potential to bring effective needs assessment to scale across a conflict. Digital communications means aid resources and information can be transferred in milliseconds to people in need through mobile phones. Digital recognition of people's faces is already helping to accelerate family tracing, where we can reunite missing family members in armed conflict with their families. So it's not all gloom. AI and cyber is already transforming our world for the better across many fields of human endeavour. And so to finish, I hope Malaysia will increasingly shape military policy and humanitarian diplomacy that strikes a humanitarian balance in this new paradigm of weapons development, starting perhaps in your own white paper in November. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for inviting the ICRC.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hugo. Such an impressive and informative presentation. So, may we now open the floor for a question and answer session. Please indicate your name and affiliation.
Any questions? Or comments, or disagreements?
Well, apologies.
Please, Hisham. Yeah.
Well, you did say the positive part of it, yeah. And what if, talking about military position, there's an argument there that says if weapons are made more precise and safer for use, so will that have a bearing on the current law now? You know, where you have rightly said it, you know, the current law suffice to, in fact, illegalize certain weapons. So if AI has taken place, you know, and then it's more precise, so that means, you know, we can have the law suggesting that, you know, the all conventional weapon should be made illegal. That, you know, may lead to that level of.
Well, I think it's a very interesting point. I think you're probably right that it gives us stronger arguments. If we know we can meet our military objectives in a cleaner, more precise way, then maybe that's absolutely right. It does give argument to saying we don't need bigger, indiscriminate weapons like nuclear weapons anymore. Yeah.
But when you say that this policy of human control has to be there, most of the weapons today are already fire and forget, where, you know, they choose their own targets. The initial part is there, where you actually select the targets, but subsequently when you release the weapons, they are on their own. So if in future if AI is input into this kind of systems, where you get the initial input and then it goes and then it doesn't find the target, and it, as I said, machine learning, and it has a mission to do. It can then select its own target. So how do we have human control in that kind of? Because weapons are now are progressing way ahead.
Yeah.
So once you have fired it or you release the weapon, I don't think so you have human control available. Example, the exact missile. Within 2 seconds, I need to actually, if there's a wrong selection of target, within 2 seconds I need to push the destruct button.
Yeah.
Before even it leaves the canister. But once it leaves the canister, they say, I don't have any control over it. So how does this in future going to be with weapons being, you know, with AI capabilities?
I mean, I think it's a really good point, and presumably fire and forget at the moment, they are given a target which they go to. They don't then hover around and seek other ones. So technology will change, as you say. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I think we still feel that if law is to be respected, there has to be human control. And if we can invent weapons that operate at such speed, we have to be able to find a way that humans can intervene at greater speed. So I think we are talking about weapons development and actually making sure that as these weapons are developed and become more common, human control is inserted in some way. But I can't tell you technically how we do that.
We discussed this in Chiang Mai early this year on autonomous vehicles becoming weaponized. And there's a possibility of that being happening, drones being weaponized and all those other things. So does this fall under this area they're looking at AI per se?
Yeah, it does. I mean, drones are
How much have you
autonomous weapons.
progressed in addressing this issue?
I'm not sure how much we've progressed because I don't know all the details of military technology, but I think what we're talking about is from a legal and an ethical perspective, we can see what is important, and we think human control is important in some way. Otherwise, we are faced with the world you slightly described, which is say, right, we are going to accept that the battlefield will be full of non-human combatants. So they will be making split-second decisions, they'll be changing their targets as they go, they will be operating within parameters given, but then they will all be left to fight as combatants in a much greater way. So, I mean, it's very hard to envision, but we certainly feel that any weapon that's being developed now in this way should not have full autonomy. It should have human control which can intervene and deactivate or repurpose it.
The question I'm asking is because I'm looking at, as you mentioned, white paper. How would you envision that we address that in the white paper? Do we say that we will actually have we will actually pursue AI and cyber, but however we will have human control, a statement like that in that white paper?
Well, I think what you'll have to do in that white paper is to have, a paragraph somewhere which talks about that balance I spoke about. So which talks about the fact that you must, as a military, engage and embrace new weapons technology. But in so doing, you will seek to always strike a balance between new technology and humanitarian law and principles. So somehow you will organize your deployment and use of these weapons in such a way that you can still intervene, deactivate, repurpose, and never sort of enable full autonomy.
Have you seen that kind of statement in any of the white papers out? Australian white paper? Or?
I haven't yet, actually.
So this is where I think the question will be raised, especially like developing countries like us, who are still dependent on purchasing, preparing systems, weapon systems, and
made by others.
Yeah. So how are they actually adhering to what you are saying? So if it's already there's a buy-in by them, and automatically developing countries like us, when we purchase equipment, it's only adhering to the IHL laws.
Well, how else could you phrase it? What is the alternative? We will.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, I mean, you could say we will encourage people we buy weapons from to design in human control measures in some way. So you can try and leverage your suppliers.
Defense industries and anonymity.
Defense industries will then will say.
Then you'll lose.
This, I think this is a good point. Talking about the future of warfare and looking at all these movies that's coming out. The young generation are always looking at this, sitting in a cabin or sitting in a container and driving things or even moving it and all this.
I mean, the other thing you can do is make a commitment in the white paper that you will, as these weapons systems develop and as you use and purchase them more, actively explore ways that you find a balance between new weapons and their ability to comply with IHL and incorporate human control.
If I may add, if you look at Australian white paper, defense white paper, it talks about, instead of talking about technology and this, they will be looking at weapons and technology are an advantage to military defense. But they will make sure that Article 36, which talks about weapon review, that any weapons that is going to be deployed and used in the Australian Defence Force will be IHL compliance. So they built in the weapons review mechanism in it. When they purchase, they must make sure that these weapons are able to comply to IHL restrictions.
So that's in the white paper.
Yes.
So you'll have to buy Australian weapons. You'll have to have that in the white paper. Yeah.
It's actually a confidence building measure. The statement can be there.
And it can be aspirational, I think, and show a commitment, even when technology and practicalities are not clear.
I have to look at the drafts of the white paper. I've not seen it. Maybe in the force development part of it, see what they have actually worded it as such on. This is something new because we have never discussed this in any of the dialogue that we had on IHL application in force development.
Yeah.
So probably we have to look at it. Thank you for this.
That's right. Any other thoughts? Anyone who thinks it's easy? Anyone who thinks it's impossible? Yes, please, Admiral.
Good evening. I'm writing from Malaysian headquarters, Armed Forces headquarters, SIG. My question actually may be the outskirts of the title here, but can be linked. Law, HL especially, are good if they are adhered to. And the advanced country who produces technology will be the hero or the champion of the law because they can adhere to as they produce and so on and so forth. For the other party who is not, couldn't care less. As long as war is concerned, the two parties are talking about winning. So as we see here now, the way the American conduct in Iraq and elsewhere with the precision weapon, with the drones and whatnot, and how it happens now also in Syria, how the Russian and the Syrian regime doing it. Putting that aside, now, how do you look at economic sanction as a weapon, which is actually killing the people slowly but surely, and the effect is in the long term? Thank you.
Well, it is a different question and a very good one, and I totally agree with you that we're looking at one small, one way that people can be hurt and you can fight wars, and one form of violence. But of course, in war today, what's mostly killing people is conventional forms of violence, small weapons, barrel bombs in Syria, artillery, aerial bombardment, etc. So conventional weapons are still killing and hurting and displacing most people. But as you rightly say, economic sanctions, which are becoming alarmingly fashionable again, impose enormous suffering on the civilian population. Particularly when they are general sanctions. I mean, maybe some of the targeted individual sanctions against very rich government or regime leaders are not damaging. But I would agree with you. We know from our experience in the ICRC in the past, the sanctions against Iraq in the 90s and early 2000s, sanctions against many other places, they're a form of structural violence. I would agree with that. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah,
Good
please.
afternoon, Doctor. I'm Hadi from Cyber Defense Operations Center. Okay, I have one question regarding to the cyber warfare. Because basically the AI or the human combatant is different with cyber warfare. Okay, in the cyber warfare conflict, and a country from A country attack B country, but the B country can attribute that attack to A country, and there is no such thing as declaration of war. So in an environment where there is no declaration of war, how can an ICRC operate during that time? Because we don't know whether the suffering is because of the cyber warfare or because of the technical issue itself. Thank you, sir.
It's a really good point. It's a really good question. I mean, we've seen a couple of examples where, in the recent Israeli-Palestinian exchange, where a Palestinian cyber attack was met by conventional weapons attack against the cyber base, supposedly. So we have seen it declared a couple of times. But you're absolutely right. How can we, as the ICRC, qualify a particular attack as an armed conflict? I don't know. Maybe Zurab, who's a lawyer as well, has a view. We'll ask him in a minute. But it seems to me we may be in a very difficult place sometimes in future of saying we feel an armed conflict applies here, but we don't know all the parties in it. But we can see evidence of attack. But it's a really good point because it creates a gap in the legal regime, as you say. Zurab, do you want to add with the...
Maybe 2 words?
Yeah. It's something I need to take back to Geneva. It's a good point.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a very, very good question. And the short answer is that it's unclear. A little longer answer is that it depends on, there can be several scenarios. One is when this cyber attack is part of a larger conventional operation. That's rather clear. That's the IGL applies even without the cyber attack. So the cyber attack is just an additional tool there. In the situation when cyber attack is, well, let me start by saying the declaration of war as such is not a precondition for the ICRC to activate its mandate and operation. There is no need, according to the conventions and the additional protocols, to have a formal declaration of the war. Situation on the ground, humanitarian consequences, is what dictates the ICRC mandate's activation. Now, situation where cyber attack in itself was a standalone action without the conventional hostilities going on is a trickier one. However, the stance of the ICRC on this is that if the consequences, we always look at the humanitarian consequences, if the humanitarian consequences are of a degree that causes a great suffering, then we can have a situation where this specific cyber attack or a chain of cyber attacks can be considered without the conventional hostilities as the armed conflict or initiation of the armed conflict. Now the third scenario, and I'm finished with that, is when there are no direct consequences. There are, like, let's say, power grids are off and etc. But the consequences are not, especially in the civilians, attaining a certain degree where it's difficult to hold this line of whether or not we can treat the cyber attack as a trigger to the conflict, essentially. But that is why the Hugo is here to discuss, and that's why the ICRC tries to facilitate these kind of discussions to find the right answers to these questions.
But I will refer it back to our lawyer working on this, and I'll take your card if I may at the end, because it's good. It's a good question. Yeah. Any other? Yes, please.
I would like to know, with at the rate AI and cyber technologies developing, what is your comment on people developing the antidote to that? That is technology which can disrupt all this, till we will have eventually to fight with bows and arrows and spears again.
Well, that might be a nice idea, but I think, like when we've seen weapons before, when we saw, the invention of aerial bombardment in the first part of the 20th century, people learn to use it, they learn to adapt, they use it against each other. I think we can expect lots of cyber efforts to, destroy or repurpose enemy weapons. I think we can see a lot of that will be in the future. Whether we'll reach such a point that we go back to bow and arrows, I doubt somehow. Because I don't think that's been a period, that's not been a trend in human war to date. I think what's been a trend more, as the Admiral said, is that there are rich technology developing states and poorer ones that are made to buy or fight differently in a sort of asymmetric struggle. So I think we'd probably go on having asymmetric battles more rather than all back to basics. Am I wrong? I mean, do you really believe that arms races can be reversed? And the question here at the back.
Hi, Dr. Slim. I'm just curious.
Do you want to say who you are for people?
Ivy from
Ministry of Defence. Yeah.
That's right. I'm just curious whether ICRC works with any of the people from the defense industry players to ensure that the weapons that have been developed are compliant of IHR, especially in regards to AI and cyber. And if, say, Malaysia, we do have aspiration to develop our local defense industry, and obviously we are not going to be like out there developing really complex and advanced technology, but then we do have aspiration to perhaps be part of the ecosystem of developing some very niche area. And what would your advice be to us in that regard?
No, it's another good question, and the answer to the first bit is yes, we do. Our humanitarian diplomacy, if you like, and our IHL dialogues are not just confined to states. We have always worked with the weapons industry as well. But what we realize this time is that we are not just going to work, if you like, with the weapons industry and with states. We are also going to need to work with massive commercial companies that develop and dominate the, virtual space. So the big Googles, Facebooks, Microsofts, everybody. So that's what we're doing. So we had on cyber, and you can read the full report on our website, we had a 2-3 day expert roundtable on cyber warfare, which absolutely did what you said. So it brought in state experts from military forces and state cybersecurity people with the industry, so all your Facebooks and Googles and all these people, and with academics and experts as well. So we always talk all together. In terms of your second question about how should you therefore develop a responsible niche weapons industry of some kind, I think read IHL, look at that review process that the Admiral referred to. Can you honestly, under Article 36, if you review the kind of niche weapons or capabilities you're developing, are they compliant with IHL? And please discuss it with us and others, and join our roundtables and discussions on these things. Because as Zurab and the Admiral is saying, this is an area developing. We're all going to have to sit together and see what's possible. But we would certainly always encourage you to discuss it with us and join and your own ASEAN efforts to think about AI and cyber as well.
Around the corner, have you seen AI weapons now, which do not adhere to IHL? In the next 5-10 years, are you seeing that kind of that is why these discussions are going on, or is this a prediction?
No, it's not. But I think it's anticipation. I think there are a lot of weapons in play already that rely on artificial intelligence, and we know that cyber attacks are happening, even if they are not in the context of armed conflicts. Most of the time, they're attacks, malign attacks against banks or companies or parts of government. We know they're happening, so we know the capability is there. I don't think it's just predictive. I think it's happening now. And I mean, you say there are fire and forget weapons, and I think, there are probably, drones and things operating in a certain way that are not always fully under human control.
I think the thing is, it's still new to us.
Yeah.
But we're not looking at it from the humanitarian part of it. We are still talking about attacks.
And defense.
State attacks or non-state actors on state.
Yeah.
We're looking at that point of view, and I mean, you can't blame armed forces of the world or armed forces within this region taking precautions against this kind of attacks, rather than looking at it from an IHL point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think what you have to do is think about how it's what I was saying, how you can use these weapons to make you better as an armed force, but also to make you better in compliance with IHL. That's the challenge you have. They've got to be a step up for you in your military capability to attack or defend. They've got to make you better at defending Malaysia. But you've got to find a way to make you better at respecting IHL as well.
I think that's why Ivy's question was, as I told you, we are more of a procurement, vendor-driven kind of currently now. And even if we develop niche areas, it's not going to be at that level of sophistication. So I think that question is very pertinent.
I do think this point you both made about procurement is a genuine challenge, because at one level you are dependent on procuring what's there. But I think somehow, therefore, you have to add some leverage to your, your suppliers.
But you see, it doesn't give us a win-win situation.
No.
You'll be always in a win-lose situation.
As a buyer.
As a person who buys. Because unless we develop our own weapon systems, and then yes, we can actually say, okay, we will adhere to IHL. But if companies that we are buying from, the missiles and whatever you call it, drones and all that, I'm not sure whether the US drones actually adhere to this IHL.
Well, it depends how they're being used and what the targets are chosen. I mean, it's not just about the machine.
But if they are designed in that manner, we will not have any control over those. Proprietary, kind of. So those are the things which...
this is a really strong point that I'm learning from this discussion.
Because we can put it in a white paper and people will say, how do you actually effect that, or how do you have influence over the procurement? You can put it under the review of the disease and all that. And I think I'm just looking through the defense white paper and trying to see where is that statement. But I don't think so. It might be a double-edged sword that if we put it in our defense white paper and some will be asking us, how actually are you going to ensure this? How are you going to make sure that your future procurements or your future development in defense industry will adhere to IHLs? That would be.
But I think most of the weapons we're seeing at the moment, with the exception of a deliberate malign cyber attack, most of them are able to be used discriminatingly, so that they can discriminate targets and stop, start, whatever. That's what we're seeing at the moment. I'm slightly imagining here sometimes when machines learn on their own, and that's the next step in a way, that they then change things in real time. And the earlier point you made about speed is what's worrying then. How do we keep up to speed with them? But I think at the moment, most of the weapons we would see are capable. They're not designed as indiscriminate weapons. They're usually designed as very discriminating weapons. Yeah, should we take one more?
Hello, okay, my name is Rudy. I am intern here in Midas. So it's not much of a question, it's more of an expression of concerns. So my concern is that I feel like that development of policies or legislation on cyber warfare is rather slow compared to the development of this kind of technologies, because humankind has entered into decades of digital era and cyber era, but the development of this legislation are slow. We don't see much. I agree with you with your point that the IHL principles, IHL and the Geneva Conventions is applied to these kind of technologies. Those are on the general principle, yes, they comply. Like, of course, the weapon, the attack should be proportionate, it should be able to discriminate. But sometimes I think that this kind of policy should be more accurate and more concise, in the sense that the digital world is interlinked. For example, a civilian object and military object in the digital world is probably used together. It's a dual use objects. So when an attack on these kind of objects, it also affects the civilian life or civilian objects. So I believe that the development of policies on the cyber warfare is really slow compared to the development of these weapons. And relating to your point, I believe I agree that a part of this is because that these huge big powers that have these capabilities are holding or are gathering the technology. They are not ready to talk on the table. But I believe that ICRC are doing well in convincing these big powers to comply with IHL principle. That is my opinion. That's it.
Thank you very much, Rudy, and it's a good opinion, and particularly because it agrees with us. But it's also, what you did is you brought out, better than I did, the extra vulnerability that a lot of these virtual spaces are integrated dual-use areas. Now, of course, we have that in a water pipe in a city or a power station in the city. It's often dual-use. We're used to that in a conventional sense, but they are extremely integrated in virtual space as well, and that is part of the problem of the broad attack front. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes,
One, we are worried about the humanitarian perspective in an uncontrollable AI and cyber warfare. How much is the success of ICRC on the humanitarian perspective of controllable and not controlled economic sanctions? For example, now, what is
which country are you thinking of?
For example, now is Tehran is one of it, Iran, and I believe Korea, North Korea.
Yeah.
They are under sanctions, and they have started. They can stop it, but they don't stop it. So, what effect does it do? Does it subdue the belligerents? I don't see. So, how long will it go?
So, there's a political and a humanitarian part of your question. I mean, the humanitarian part of the question is, as I said before, and if I look at North Korea now and Iran, I have no doubt that those kind of very broad sanctions have real humanitarian consequences for the population. So they have economic effects. They impoverish. They create problems they can create problems for medical imports, healthcare supplies, etc., etc. So I agree with that. Now, you're then asking me a political question. Is it a good political tool to use sanctions? All I can say is that sanctions are recognized as a legal instrument in the UN Charter, in Chapter 7 and Article 42, or whichever way around it is, I've forgotten. So they're not illegal per se. And then you're asking me if they make political sense. And I'm not sure we have strong evidence that they work effectively politically. But for two reasons. I mean, this is speaking personally now. First of all, they tend to mobilize the population against the person imposing the sanctions and strengthen support for the regime. And secondly, the government, which often remains in power, can actually survive itself even when its people are suffering. So I'm not convinced it's an effective political tool. Yeah, speaking personally.
So it's a weapon damaging the human, and we can't do anything about it.
Well, I think we can all, you can all...
He's talking about weaponizing economic sanctions.
But he's right. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think we know that's what devastates a society. I mean, we know the worst thing about war. It's usually the indirect effects of a war. Most people die in a war not because they're shot or killed or blown up. Most people die in a war because they can't get to hospitals, because they lose access to their livelihoods, their businesses are destroyed, they get displaced, they get poor, and they die of hunger, disease, and other things. So we know that that's the general effect of closing down a society.
I think, Hugo, this is a very good topic, and I think this is one avenue that probably we can put it into a Pujaya forum next year. Because this is very interesting.
Which one? This AI or sanctions?
AI.
AI.
Don't forget the sanctions.
You're going to get me into trouble on sanctions. Yeah. Interestingly, when I was in Tehran last year, we had a policy dialogue with the Iranian Foreign Ministry, and of course they made exactly the same point, and they alerted us and said we can expect to have humanitarian consequences from these sanctions.
I'm not pro Iran or Korea.
No, but it's
human.
Yeah.
So, I will not stick, I mean, this is a good point, but we're not ready to their forum.
Okay.
I might lose my job. So actually we can look at this, and I think there's a lot more discussions we can...
There is, and with real experts in cybersecurity people.
Yes, and especially cybersecurity as well as...
And your procurement point, I think the point you and Ivy are making about procurement, I think must be put on the table as well.
Yes. So, I mean, developing countries have no choice.
Yeah.
And we can make a statement in our defense white paper, but then how do we actually effect it? The problem why I'm asking you this question is, next year, Midas will have to actually explain to the public whatever that we put in the defense white paper. And if we cannot rationalize it in the public, and the defense white paper will become just a rhetoric document, that is what we are ensuring that whatever that's put into the white paper is doable.
Well, I'm sure Belanya and the Admiral can help you with phrasing.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to get him anyway.
So you can find a way to say that it's an aspiration, a desire, and an important principle.
Thank you very much.